Are we live? We can be live, that's fine. Give people a chance to get online. Okay, my friends, ready for some exciting learning? Yeah? Okay. So let's take it from the top. Parshat Teruma. God informs the Jewish people that He is going to be taking up a mobile residence amongst them. After having lived everywhere and nowhere for more than 2 millennia, closer to 2,500 years, God conveys a message to the Jewish people: I'm ready to settle down. And you are going to build that place. It's going to be a mobile one for now. Eventually, I'm going to have a permanent home, and I want it to be amongst you, and I want your help. You're going to make this happen for me. The people, of course, are so touched and overjoyed. They're flattered. God wants them, and He wants to live amongst them, and He asks them to build a home for Him. And we, the Jewish people, are called upon to provide the materials, and then the artisans and the craftspeople and the experts will build it exactly as God wants it, because not only is He going to live amongst us, He also gave instructions, told us exactly what He wants His house to look like. And that's kind of how Parshat Teruma opens. God speaks to Moshe. He says, speak to the Jewish people and take donations from them. They have to want to do this. I'm not forcing anybody. None of this is mandatory. This has to come from their own volition, from the goodness of their own giving heart. Pasuk Gimel. This is Perek Chafei, chapter 25, verse 3, the third pasuk in this week's Torah portion, Parshat Teruma, which means donation. V'zois hatruma, and this is the donation, asher tikchu me'itam, that you should take from them. Now you just said you should take from anybody, kol ish asher yidvenu libay, anybody whose heart impels him to give, anybody who gives out of the goodness of their heart. So I guess that means everybody can give just about anything, right? Wrong. You can give as much as you'd like, but here's what I want, says God. He has a specific wish list. This is exactly what you will be taking from them. And we have, very interestingly, in Medrash Lekach Tov, and the Medrash Lekach Tov says, Loi trumas dagan tidish v'yitzer. This is not the truma you're familiar with. This is not the grain or the fruit of the grape or the olive. No. This is not the regular food called truma that's given to the Kohen. This is a different kind of truma. This is the zahav, kesef, and nechoshes. This is the precious metals. Precious metals. We're not looking for your grain. Don't bring us your oil. We don't need your wine today. We need your precious metals. The Sefarno develops this idea in a more clear sense. He says it's not just a question about confusion with the terminology of truma, which typically it means grain to most people, because that's what we've become familiar with. So the Sefarno says that Tziva shelo yikablu kol shava kesef. God says, I'm not taking valuables, things which are worth money and could be sold and exchanged for other kinds of materials that might be needed. No. I don't want you to bring peiros. Don't bring me produce. Don't bring me margolis. Don't bring me pearls or avodim tevis or diamonds. She'enan me avnei ha'efed v'hachesha, unless they are the exact precious stones that are specified for use on the breastplate or on the epaulets, on the shoulder pads. But if it's not for the onyx stones on the shoulder, if it's not the array of stones that is going to be on the breastplate, and there's a very specific array of stone, 12 different kinds of precious stone, but certain size, and only one of them. In the end, it was the Nesiim, the leaders who brought those stones. Nobody happened to have them hanging around. So you can't just bring diamonds. Diamonds aren't good enough. Don't bring me your money. Yikablu, the only thing we will accept, Moshe Rabbeinu is telling the Jewish people in God's name, is Teruma shegufa nichneses b'melechas ha-Mishkan. The only kind of materials we'll be accepting today is materials that will actually be used for the fabrication of the Mishkan. And they are the 13 things which are going to be enumerated. So only that which will actually be used. So God says, I want to live amongst you. I'm going to give you exact instructions of the materials that I want you to bring. You can bring as many or as few. How much is up to you. You don't want to participate? That's fine. This is your privilege. If you want, you may participate. But here's exactly what I want you to bring. So you couldn't just write a check. That wouldn't work. And you couldn't bring all kinds of other precious things that could be worth a lot of money, that anybody building a shul will be happy to take. Not when it came to the Mishkan. You had to bring these things specifically. All right. And the Medrash Lekach Tov kind of leads off with the precious metals, Zav, Kesef, and Necheshes. So it's very specific. We're talking about 3 different kinds of precious metal, Zav, Kesef, and Necheshes. All right, and then we have all these other kinds. So why is that so important to bring these specific kinds, and how and why will they serve as the redemption for the Jewish people? We're going to see later that the Zav kind of is a kapara, it's like an atonement. So I want to share with you interesting words from the Medrash Rabbah, which is found in chapter 49. And when we finish learning this Medrash Rabbah, I'm going to present you the big question. This has baffled me since my childhood, and I'm not sure if I solved it today, but this is the question we're going to deal with. It's the why there's no iron. There's no iron. There's Zav, there's Kesef, there's Necheshes. That's it. And I know what you're thinking. Well, iron doesn't belong there. Iron isn't used. Not only is iron used, the iron is specifically used, and the silver we have a problem with, as you'll see in a moment. So let me just first introduce my question with this little medrash. The medrash says, this is the truma, the donation you should take from them. Who is this? Zo, says the medrash, this proverbially refers to Knesset Yisrael, the congregation of Israel. Shehi truma, we are the donation. God wants you, doesn't want your money. Obviously, when a person gives their money, they're giving of themselves. Nobody likes to part with their money. So when you give your money, you're giving self. But God really wants you. It's not really about your precious metals. And how do we know this? Shenemer, because it's written, and here the Medrash invokes a pasuk that speaks about the Jewish people euphemistically. And this pasuk says that the Jewish people are likened or metaphorized to the concept of Teruma. It says, Kadesh Yisrael Reishis Tvuasa. Hashem has the holy, Israel is holy to him. We are like the firstling grain. Okay, so that's usually the way we refer to the word Truma. Like the Medrash Lekach Tov said, we're not talking about your wheat and your spelt today. But nonetheless, that's usually what we think of as Truma. We are the Truma. God wants us. Now, that's nice. Okay, Zahav Chesef, gold and silver. Oh, Medrash says, once again, Zu Knesset Yisrael. So first God said, V'zeis Truma. He said, what do I want? I want you. Then he said, I want your gold and silver. What does that mean? I want you. I want Knesset Yisrael. How do we know this? Because we have a pasuk in Tehillim, and the pasuk in Tehillim says in Psalm 68, Kanfe Yoina Nechba V'Kesef. The Jewish people are metaphorized as the wings of a dove, and they're coated or covered in silver. Okay, so we are like silver, gold and silver. Nechoshes, copper. This is Eretz Yisrael. This is our land, the land of Israel. How do I know this? Shenemer, because it says, Umaharareha, and from her mountains, Tachatsev Necheshes. One can extract copper. And then the Medrash goes on to say, and this is really going to be where I'm going to drill down here in this business with the copper. The Medrash goes on to say, Tcheles, this refers to the Jewish people, as it says about the tzitzit, Hakonaf Psil Tcheles, Argama and Talas Shani, the various other kinds of beautiful wools that were dyed in specific colors. He brings down various verses that refer to the Jewish people using those exact colors and the sources of those dyes, and from this we know that God wants us. All right, so the only thing that we're not is copper. We're not copper. Copper was the land of Israel. We're gold, we're silver, we're purple, we're red, we're just not copper. Copper is Israel. How do you know it's Israel? Because the pasuk says. It says about Eretz Yisrael, and this is a quote from Deuteronomy 8, verse 9. You will not have any poverty in the land of Israel. Israel can provide for its people. Everything you need is already in the land of Israel. You won't be missing anything. Eretz asher avaneha barzel, the land whose stones are iron. Umaharareha, And her hills, tachzev necheshes, can become a source for copper. So we have iron and copper. And I know what you're thinking, that's just a euphemism. It says, Eretz Asher Avoneha, her stones are barzel, but the real quarry, the Maharareh, tachzev necheshes. No, that's actually not so. Because although the Targum Yonasan renders this whole thing as parable and euphemism, speaking about the Jewish people who are studying Torah, and the Chachmei HaTorah who understand the Torah, they have such a fast grasp on the Torah, like they have an iron grip on the questions that are being asked. Yeah, that's very nice. But the Targum Yishalmi, the way the Ramban says it, he says, in the quarries of Israel, you will find stone that is strong as iron, and with this you can build homes, and the homes will be strong homes. But then Ramban says, no. It means that there were copper and iron quarries. Clearly. He says you got copper and iron quarries. Because, he says, for a country to be successful, to build itself an infrastructure, you need to have iron and you need to have copper. By the way, until today, these are the metals that are used most often. These are the everyday metals. Whether it's heavy machinery, whether it's construction, whether it's wiring today or piping, invariably iron and copper. Those are the metals that are used today. They have alloyed metals and so on and so forth, but these are the mainstay of basic metals. And you need that, he says, a country needs to have iron and copper more so than it needs to have gold and silver. So if you gold and silver, you might have to travel to South Africa. But for your copper, for your iron, Eretz Yisrael will provide it. So Ramban says very clearly that the land of Israel provides both copper and iron. And so, little me asks the question, if Hashem says, I want you to bring me the metals that are going to be used in order to fashion that which is needed in my house. I have accessories. I have to make sure everything's there. I have some golden accessories. I have this communication box with these beautiful figurines, which is going to be like a satellite dish. That's called an aura. That's pure gold. That's all gold. Okay. Then I have this beautiful table. That's going to be gold too. Menorah, forget about it. Pure as gold. All hammered out. Yeah, what are you going to hammer it with? I guess you're going to need to have iron. But if we look only a few verses from now, we will see that iron was needed. Turn forward in your Chumash, just a couple of verses into the second reading. After we finish talking about the Aron, we talk about the Shulchan, the table. And when we hear about the table, we hear about various accessories that the table is going to need so we can produce the showbread that will be piled on the table each and every Shabbat, and there it will be until the coming Shabbat. And so, if you'll take a look, Rashi describes the details in verse 29. He says there are ka'aros and kapos and kashoisov. There are molds, and there are these straws, and there's going to be little cups. So the cups are for the incense that's brought, and then he talks about the mold in which the bread is going to be made. And he says they're called lechem haponim because they have ponim. Has got lots of face. It's got lots of, so to speak. There isn't just one top and bottom to this bread. This bread is multifaceted, and as such, kaisolov zukufim keneged svasa shulchan. Its walls, the bread kind of curls up on the sides. And Rashi says, and I'm quoting now, "V'haya asoiloi defus zahav udefus barzel." That in the kitchen, there needed to be gold forms that held the bread and iron forms. Why the iron? So he says, Bishal barzel hinefe, it's going to be baked in the iron. When you take it out of the oven, Erev Shabbat, you place it into the gold form, Erev Shabbat. And there it waits until tomorrow, when it will be arranged on the actual shulchan. Okay. And that form, which held the bread, is kari ka'ara. That's what's called the plate. Now, Rashi very clearly says then that in the shulchan, there was a set of 24 forms. 12 of them were gold, and 12 of them were iron. And the interesting thing is that the iron served a much more important purpose. You actually baked in the iron. The gold was just like a holding pattern. You took it at Erev Shabbat, and it spent the night in a gold form. You could live without the gold form. You couldn't do it without the iron form. Where'd the iron come from? Where'd you get the iron from? So you'll tell me, I don't know, they bought iron. Okay, so why couldn't the people bring the iron? If you're telling me it's because there's something special about gold, there's something special about silver, something special about copper. And the very Medrash that's going through this whole list, and it says, why is copper special? We can't find any reference in the Torah to Jewish people being metaphorized or likened to copper, but at least we found the land of Israel praised because it contains copper. Well, the same verse also says that the land of Israel contains iron. Not to mention that everybody has iron flowing through their blood and coursing through their veins. But the fact is that the Medrash talks about Nechoshes, Zu Eretz Yisrael. It specifically fingers this verse in chapter 8 of Deuteronomy, verse 9. And it says about Harareh Tachzev Nechoshev, and very conveniently cuts out the first part of the pasuk that says Avaneha Barzel. So this has always bothered me. How come they didn't bring iron? How come they couldn't bring iron? Iron is bad? Why is iron bad? Iron is very good. Iron is needed. Iron is necessary. So somebody's telling me, well, iron you make weapons with. Yeah, irons you also made the hammer that you hammered at the menorah with. Iron you made you baked the showbread in. I mean, it's functional. Iron is the strongest metal and it's functional. And that's why it's used for functional purposes. So that's the question. Okay, fair question? Question? Got precious metals, heavy metals, no iron. No Iron Man. And I'm asking why. Okay, so in order to try to solve this question, so I started to look all over the place to try to find maybe there's got to be something about, the use of gold, silver, and copper, which were specific to the Beis HaMikdash itself. So that was the actual accessories. The iron is whatever. It was used in order to produce the showbread, but it's not actual Beis HaMikdash material. Well, that is actually and factually incorrect. Because let's go back to another Rashi now. And this is the Rashi that deals with the fact that it seems that this truma, this donation, is according to the goodness of your heart. It's not mandatory. You give as you please, and as much of it as you want. Just only what God asked for. All right, let's take a look. Tikchu es trumasi. Please join me in the fourth comment of Rashi on this parsha. Rashi says, Amru Rabbi Seinu, a rabbis taught, Shalosh Trumais Amuris Kan. There are 3 times that it says the words, God says, give me truma. It says over here, Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe Lemer. And then it says, Daber el Bnei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel. And, V'yikho li truma, take from me truma. And then it says afterward, Me'es kol isha sheyidvenu liba, anybody who wants to be generous and give, tikchu trumasi. That's the second time. And then it says, V'zoisa truma. The word truma is mentioned 3 times in virtually 1 sentence, or 2 sentences. Speak to the children of Israel, take my truma, from them you should take the truma, and this is the truma you should take. And each time, by the way, the word truma is associated with the word take. The first time it says v'yikhu li truma, the second time it says tikhu es trumasi, the third time v'zeisa truma asher tikhu. So really, if it wouldn't say truma 3 times, I could probably figure this out. If it would say dabro b'nei Yisrael v'yikhu li truma, me'es kol ish asher yidvenu libay, and just cut off the last 3 words of this pasuk, you would not know the difference. It would read just fine. You say, what does God want? He wants you to take his truma. From who? From all the people who will be generous. Why does it have to say, take the truma from the people who will be generous, take the truma? Totally superfluous. And then, in case you're not sure what we're doing yet, verse 3 begins, V'zoisa truma asher tikhu. And this is the truma that you should take. First of all, you don't have to call it truma. I know it's called truma. You said it twice already. So you could just say, V'zoisa asher tikhu. If you wanted to say, there's specific materials accepted and everything else is banned, so then say, and this is what you should take. Here's what's acceptable. You get your list. Here's the wish list, and here's what's acceptable. Here's what we'll take, and here's what we're not going to take. All right. 3 times the word truma appears, adding seemingly absolutely nothing to the understanding of this verse. That's a problem. So Rashi, therefore, reaches for the teachings of our sages, and he says, Amar Rabbi Seinu, our rabbi said that it does say three times the word Truma. And this is because there were three different kinds of donations that were required from the Jewish people. Achas, one Truma, was called Trumas Beka Lagilgelis. This was the half shekel that was provided by each and every member of the people. You know what they did with those half shekels?
They counted people.
That's a good guess. What did they do with the silver, though? Did they count the people giving back the silver after?
Don't think so.
No. So actually, the foundation of the entire Mishkan, the walls of the Mishkan were made with these boards, tall boards, and the foundation was something called adonim, or silver sockets. And how were those silver sockets created? They took these half silver shekels, they melted them down, and they created the silver sockets. Okay, so that was not as per everybody's generosity. How much silver did you give? Half a shekel. Who gave half a shekel? Everybody. What if I was poor? Figure it out. What if I'm rich? Sorry, that's all you can give. Just half a shekel. That's not about generosity. That's not about the giving of the heart. That's about, this is what it is. Okay, so that's the first Truma. That's not the Truma we're talking about here in Parshat Teruma, because this over here it says, Me'es kol isha sheyidvenu libay. Here we're speaking about generosity. You can give as you please. And this is explained very, very clearly, Rashi says, Mefurish be'ele pekudei. In the Parsha of Ele Pekudei, you take a look at verse 38, verses 26 and 27. It's very clearly spelled out what happened with the silver. Achas, one of these donations was Terumas HaMizbeach. One was given for the purpose of the Mizbeach. Mizbeach is the altar. What did you bring on the altar? Offerings. When? Daily. On whose behalf? On every single Jew. So how could you bring a korban on behalf of every single Jew? What's the only way to do that? You have to get every single Jew to contribute. And this was not a one-time event in the desert. This actually happened on an annual basis across the land of Israel for nearly a millennia. Each and every single year, in the month of Adar, a call went out to the Jewish people. They started posting on the Sanhedrin's Facebook, remember to give your shekel. They had ads going out. They had billboards everywhere. And during the course of the 30 days of Adar, this year we get 60, but there was the usual Adar, everybody came forward with a half a shekel. And those who didn't come forward after Purim, they put the screws to you. Say, hey, we saw you didn't yet bring your half a shekel. And we got everybody to give a half a shekel. Those half a shekel were placed in these enormous drums in the Beis HaMikdash, and it was those drums that the offerings were brought. And so each and every single day when an offering was brought, in the morning and in the evening, on whose behalf was it brought? On behalf of every single Jew. And it served as an atonement for all of us. This is like the forerunner of shul membership, where everybody contributes equally. You can give more, that's your business, but everybody's got to pay their way, because otherwise, you're not actually buying into this. This needs to be your baby. You might remember that when Moshe Rabbeinu was davening at the time when he was challenged by Korach, he said to God, please don't turn towards their offering. Which offering? They didn't bring an offering. Rashi explains, the tiny bit of korban that belongs to Korach and his people, that the fire of the Mizbeach miraculously shouldn't consume that tiny bit, so that they would not be atoned for. And this, once again, required everybody's commitment, everybody's participation equally. And that's where they counted the people, by the way. Annually. There's an annual census count, half shekels. We don't count people, we count half shekels. So everybody gave a half shekel, and the half shekels we use for the Mizbeach. Okay, so we have silver. The first time silver was taken, it's equal. Everybody gave the same amount of silver. With this, we created the foundation. It's a very powerful message. The foundation of the Mishkan, everybody's equal. What comes out of the ground, what rises up in majesty, everybody gives differently. The majestic Mishkan. But the actual foundation, equal. Everybody gives half a shekel. Mizbeach, the offerings, everybody's got to provide equally. Everybody's got to give. So that's the second. And then Rashi says that this was brought lekupos into the drums. Liknas mehem karbanos sibur. For this was purchased the offerings, the public offerings. Va'achas, and one of the trumas. This is trumas hamishkan. That's our truma here. That's the truma we're talking about now. And the Teruma we're talking about in this week's Parsha, which goes through 11 or 13 or 15 items, depending on which tradition you follow and how you want to enumerate this. He says, in these items, this was nidvas kol echad v'yechad. This was your generosity, as much as you were willing to give. Nobody told you what to do. Nobody told you how much. It wasn't mandatory. This was elective. And Rashi enumerates it as Yud Gimel Dvarim Hamurim B'inyan. These are the 13 different materials listed here. Gold, and silver, and copper, and techelet wool, and argaman wool, and tolat shani, and shesh, which is linen, and izim, which is from goat hairs, and orot elim, which is from the ram's skin, and orot choshim, the skin that comes from this strange animal. We don't really know what it's called, the tachash, a once upon a time animal. You know, the proverbial unicorn. I'm not saying that literally. And finally, atzei shitim. What does that give you? That gives you a full 13. Now, obviously, if you finish counting through everything, it ends at 15. But the way the Mefarshim explain it is, 3 of them are wool, so that's one item. Wool dyed this way, wool dyed that way. It's not intrinsically a different material. So here's the thing. Kulam, Rashi says, all of these things were hutzruchu lemelechas hamishkan. All of these things were needed for the building of the Mishkan. Or if it wasn't for building of the Mishkan, it was for big day kahuna. It was for the clothing, the raiments that the Kohanim would wear. Kishetedaktek behem. When you look carefully, you'll see each of these items was used. And Rashi now continues, Zov, Kesef, and Necheshes. Gold, silver, and copper. Rashi says, one second. Kulam ba'u b'nedava. This was all brought as per your generosity. Ish mashanad v'libay. Each person in the amount that he or she, by the way, the she's were more generous than the he's. The women came first, as Ramban says. Vayaviu ha'anashim al ha'nashim. The women were more generous, and it's not because when it came to giving to stupid things, the men were first. They ran to give gold to the egel. When it came to building a Mishkan, the women were first. The men were lagging behind. But everybody gave as per their own spirit of generosity. Chutz min hakesef, except for the silver, where everybody had to give equally, a machzas hashekel. And Rashi says, we don't find in any of the details of the Mishkan that they needed silver more. And Rashi's like, there's a problem with this. And Rashi finishes off, I'm going to skip and just take it to the end of Rashi. Rashi says, V'sha'ara kesef, habab nedava, but the rest of the silver that was donated, asuya l'chlisharis. This was made for various utensils that will be used in the Beis HaMikdash, which are not spelled out here. So Rashi has to reach to explain how come silver is included in this list. He says it's included because it was used for klisharis. Really? So if it was used for klisharis, then iron is also used for klisharis. So why isn't the iron mentioned? It's not like the gold and the copper, which played a major role, or was obvious, but here in this Teruma, which came from the spirit of generosity, we're trying to figure out how exactly the silver was used. The only silver we're familiar with was the silver that came from the other Terumos, from the equal donations, the half shekels. The Ibn Ezra, very interestingly, he says, dealing with this very issue, he says, Amar Hagoin, the Torah luminary, the genius said, Ki loi matzu kesef b'mishkan. I presume he refers to Rashi. He says, we didn't find kesef in the Mishkan, in the countings of the Mishkan. Im kain, so he says, if not so, how could we say, hechsiv ki kesef nedova? How could we say that silver was part of generosity? Silver is not part of generosity. V'hu heshiv ki kesef achar nedova. He says that the other silver was used for generosity. What was it used for? Ibn Ezra says, L'tzoyrech shulchan kesef, for a silver table. Ki lo yitachin, it's impossible to imagine, shaliyir sham shulchan l'takin olav davar. There couldn't be that there was no kitchen table. You needed a table, you needed a counter. How are you going to make the bread? There had to be a counter somewhere. What were they going to make it out of? He says, oilachtech, whether it was to cut up the carbon, or lirchatz olav, to wash the animals over there. Or l'chatzaitzreis, it was needed for trumpets. Lemizrakim, for bowls that were used. So basically, he's talking about various reasons as to why we would use the silver, trying to figure out the silver. And Ibn Ezra says, "V'hinei lo hoya b'maisa hamishkan barzel." There was no iron anywhere in the Mishkan. And he says this is connected to the first Beis Hamikdash, that it says, "Umakoves v'hagarzen kokli barzel inishma b'bayis b'habanasei." That we know when the first Beis Hamikdash was built, that it was built without the clanging of iron. So all scoring of the stones, everything had to be done off-site, and the Beis Hamikdash was built silently. Okay, that's very nice. That's very nice, and I understand that you don't want to use iron in building the first Beis Hamikdash. But firstly, if you want to talk about that, when we talk about hammering out the menorah of gold, it had to be iron. Was it a gold hammer? For sure it was iron, number one. Number two, Rashi himself clearly says that there was iron that was used. So whither the iron? Precious metals, no iron. Something here seems to be missing. So it must be, I'm not sure I know the answer in Pshat, but it must be that there's more than just Pshat over here. It must be that the gold and the silver and the copper have a certain representation and a certain meaning attached to it. And therefore, if they needed an iron hammer, they know where to buy it, but they didn't want the people to bring iron. There's something about iron that didn't belong in the donations of the Mishkan. And I'm going to ask you the question and try to answer, what was that? What was it? But first, let me begin with another question. Why did you need to have silver and copper? Why couldn't everything just be gold? Gold. Go gold. It's Beis Hamikdash. And we know when it came to Beis Hamikdash, no expenses were spared.
They have enough for everyone?
Enough?
Yeah.
We know when it came to Beis Hamikdash that it says ein aniyos b'makom ashirus, and that there was no limit on expenditures. So much so that they didn't make repairs. Things didn't make repairs. Things got stained or very dirty, throw it out. That's it. Beis Hamikdash, everything was first class. So you're going to tell me, you know that gold is a soft metal. And you know that what was required here was some heavy metal. And because it was heavy metal, that's why they couldn't use gold. And I'm going to tell you that I'm not so sure that's correct. And listen why I'm not so sure. The Medrash Rabbah in chapter 35 says, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish taught. He's also known as sometimes as Reish Lakish. Lehoya ha'olam roi lehishtamish bezav. Gold was not really worthy, the world wasn't worthy of having gold. So v'lama nivra. Why was gold created? And Rabbi Shimon answers, B'shvil ha-mishkan or B'shvil Beis HaMikdash. Gold was created for the Mishkan and for the Beis HaMikdash. You might remember from the beginning of the book of Genesis that the Torah, when it starts describing the newly formed planet and the rivers that flow and the different locations, it identifies a place as there's the good gold. It talks about gold right away. It says, V'zahav ha'aretz hahu is toiv. And the Medrash says, this is like ha'har ha'toiv ha'zev ha'alvanoin, indicating that it was actually gold mines in Eretz Yisrael. That's what the Medrash sounds like. So the Medrash is saying that the reason that gold was created was specifically for the purpose of the Mishkan, for a holy purpose. Now, a commodities trader told me today that gold is the only precious metal that really has not changed in thousands of years. He says, once upon a time, you could use, I think he told me, a liter of gold to buy a chariot, and he made the calculation that's about what it cost to buy an automobile today. He said an ounce of gold was what it cost to buy a toga in ancient Rome. An ounce of gold, which is about $1,300, is what it costs to buy a really nice suit today. It hasn't changed. The value of gold hasn't changed. And it's true that for a little while, platinum seemed to have eclipsed gold, but that's only because of supply and demand. And platinum today is less than $800 an ounce, whereas gold is well over $1,300 an ounce. So gold is rebounded because they were using platinum for a specific purpose, and that made it rare. And because supply and demand makes it change, but that's a perfect example. Here you have platinum that was sky high 20 years ago, and now it's plunged. And really and truly, platinum and silver, they don't really look different, right? So we have gold is gold. The gold standard. The gold standard isn't. We don't have the silver standard, the copper standard. People say go for the gold. They mean go for the top. And that's kind of in some marketing circles they still use the term platinum, but really and truly that's a thing of the past decades, of the past century actually. So this is the point of, and the people have always had this desire for gold, whether it was the Aztec, the Incas, ancient Egypt, anywhere you go, ancient China, anywhere you go, you will find that the kings and queens had an obsession with collecting and hoarding gold, and it's been that way straight through. In fact, the U.S. greenback used to be supposedly backed by gold. Supposedly. You could be able to go to Fort Knox with your dollar and get your gold. Okay? At a certain point, I think it was Roosevelt's time, he said, that's ridiculous. We don't have gold to back it up. And that's when it all changed. And when the United States imposed the gold standard, they were able to inhibit the price of gold. But the moment free markets with gold started in the early 70s, boom, gold went sky high again. So gold is this very, very special, precious material that's really unparalleled. And you're thinking to yourself, okay, so we could use gold, but gold is pliant and malleable and soft. How could gold be used for all the different things in the Beis HaMikdash? Well, the same Medrash there lists 7 types of gold. And it says they were all used for different purposes in the Beis HaMikdash. I'll give you the names in Hebrew because I don't know what they would be called in English. He says Zahav Tahor, purest gold. Zahav Tov, good gold. Zahav Ophir, Zahav Mupaz, Zahav Shachut, Zahav Sagur, Zahav Purium. And that's why it also appears in Masechet Yoma on page 44, a listing of 7 different types of gold. I think, I'm not maybe wrong, I would imagine that the differences in gold have to be in how they're alloyed, that they're mixed together with other metals. Even today, like 24 karat gold is not pure gold. Today you have 24 karat gold, 14 karat gold. It's all modified. The gold is modified. I mean, to get the gold out of the stone, out of the rock, so stone is no simple job. That's the process of the crucible and extracting the gold. And then they mix the gold, and they develop the gold, and they build the gold. And that's the gold that's used. So we had different kinds of gold. You know, today you have rosé gold and pink gold and white gold. What is it? So it's alloys. It's different things that add into the gold. So the Sifsei Kayan, he asks in his commentary in the Torah, why did you need to have 7 kinds of gold? If the Torah says gold is gold. I mean, look, why the Aron had to be made of one gold, and the Shulchan of a different gold, and the menorah of yet another gold? Why 7 kinds of gold? And the Sifsei Kayan answers, the reason you had 7 kinds of gold is because there were different purposes in the Beis HaMikdash, and the different purposes in the Beis HaMikdash required different consistencies, different strength of gold. He says the gold cover of the ark and the keruvim, the cherubs which were hammered out of a single ingot of gold, and the gold of the rings in which the staves, the poles would be placed, they had to be very hard gold. Because if they weren't hard gold, what would happen? It would collapse under its own weight. You had an enormous slab of gold. Rashi says a tefach thick. That's like 4 inches thick. Why was it so thick? Because if it wasn't so thick, it would simply collapse. It would implode. And you have these figurines going up 10 tefachim. It's impossible to imagine. It's an enormous slab of gold. It's empty in the middle. 2 heavy figurines. The gold would collapse. And there's no reason to assume it was all miracles. So he said the only way that gold could have sustained itself is if it was alloyed and it was very strong gold. And those rings would they would fall off. They would be too soft. They would get bent. They wouldn't be able to handle the weight. So he said, clearly the rings had to be made of very, very strong gold. And he says the menorah was miksha, hammered out. He says miksha means that it was hammered. It had to be very, very strong. He says the word miksha means hammered, and he maintains the Sifsei Kayan that the word is also like chametz noksha. Chametz noksha means hardened chametz. There's a question about chametz which didn't rise fully, and it kind of got hardened. What's the halacha with that? There's a discussion about it. So chametz noksha means hardened chametz before it fully fermented. He says the same idea here is the menorah being miksha was made of very hard gold. It was very heavy. You had these 6 branches, which were adorned with goblets and flowers and spheres, knobs. I mean, they were going out like that. I mean, which is a collapse under their own weight. The only way the menorah could have survived was that it was made of very strong gold. And then he goes through the kelim in the Beis Hamikdash, and he says you had the gold that was used in clothing, the gold that was woven into the wool. He says that can't be hard gold; that has to be very soft gold. So you have the gold of the Kohen Gadol's diadem, which for all we know fit around his head. It had to be soft to actually be pliant to be around his head. He said you had the gold which was the filigree. Filigree is not hard gold. He said the gold was a brighter gold. It shone brighter. It had a different color to it. There was a filigree, a little crown. It's called a zer zahav. A little this beautiful design on top. And he says, so this is what the different golds were used for. There was the mizgeres, there was the band around the shulchan. He says, so depending on the purpose, that's what you use the different kinds of gold for. So I will tell you that really and truly, if it's a Mishkan, it should be made of purest gold. All gold. And once it's made of purest gold, you'll be able to make the various artifacts by changing the percentage of gold. You just change the alloy, that's all. Mix more silver or nickel or copper, whatever it is that you mix into it. I don't know how they make the alloy of gold. And you make the gold that's necessary. So the answer cannot be that certain things require the strength of silver or the strength of copper. And the answer cannot be that the reason that we don't use silver today in our plumbing is because it's too expensive, because in the Beis Hamikdash, no expense was ever spared. So there has to be clearly another reason that they use gold, silver, and copper. Now, interestingly enough, not only should it have been gold from the perspective of you should use what's most valuable, there's a very interesting medrash, a medrash Tanchuma, that says zahav. First thing we hear about is zahav. Why zahav? Says the medrash Tanchuma, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yavai zahav, let gold come in the Mishkan, v'yechaper al zahav, let the gold atone for the gold. Which gold? Which gold are we atoning for? The calf, the golden calf, the egel. As it says, "Vayisparku kol ha'ames nizmi azov." They took off their gold jewelry. They gave their gold. V'lachein, therefore, miskaperim b'zahav. Therefore, says the Medrash Tanchuma, that's why the atonement for using gold to make an idol is using gold to create the house of Hashem. And that's why it says, "V'zayis hatruma asher tikchu me'itam zahav." All right, so why don't we just stop there? If it's about the golden calf, why don't we just stop with gold? On the contrary, if this is about atoning for gold, the golden calf didn't have copper or silver, the golden calf was all gold, then we should have a Beis Hamikdash of purest gold. Only gold. There should be no silver, there should be no copper. Iron, I don't know, if you need iron, use iron, but why have anything but gold if the whole idea is to atone for gold? In the Rishonim, this idea of the gold filters through in the words of the Toldos Yitzchak. He says like this. He says, why does it say gold first? Zahav, kesef, and necheshes. He says, Zahav b'rosh, and that's to tell you, shenimchal al oven ha'egel, because Hashem wanted to forgive them for the sin of the golden calf, which was made of Zahav. And the Toldos Yitzchak says, I'll show you another interesting example where when the Torah gives us a list of different things, the first of the litany will be that which is most appropriate for the notion of atonement. And he says this is when the Torah talks about offerings, animal offerings, it spells out three different kinds of animals, namely shor, an ox, which is from the cow family, kevet, kesev, which is from the sheep family, or eiz, from the goat family. And the Toldos Yitzchak says, Sheba meshach chatu nisratzu. In the very same thing they sinned with, that's how Hashem became reconciled with them. And that's what they did. They served an idol, a golden calf. So now the offering would be a cow. Incidentally, the Parah Aduma, the red calf, is supposed to resemble gold. And it says, let the mother come and clean up the mess of the baby. That's why it's called Parah. It's to be a female cow. Parah Aduma, a red cow, because red is a color associated with gold. And it says the idea of impurity, the highest level of impurity is Avodah Zarah, which is like death. Now it's the golden calf. The golden calf is a baby cow. So the mother cow becomes the ashes of the red heifer. She cleans up for the kid. That's what a good mother cleans up after the kid makes a mess. So this is all about gold then. So why only the first thing? It should only be about gold. We should have had gold and other materials, but gold. Why bother with the other metals altogether? And now I'm going to make my question even stronger. So you say, well, there's a variety. We seem to need to have other things too. Yeah, there's a Medrash Tanchuma like that. And the Medrash Tanchuma says like this: Zahav, Kesef, Nechoshes, gold, silver, copper, Oiris, Elim, rams dyed red, Madamim, Shemen Lamoyer, all the way down to the end, which is the oil for the purpose of illumination. Says the Medrash Tanchuma, and I'm quoting now. Zahav corresponds Keneged Malchus Bavel, corresponds to Babylon. Babylon, of course, destroyed the first base of Mikdash and sent us into Golus. How do we know this? It says about Bavel, and this is found in the second chapter of the book of Daniel, in the 38th verse. It says, Antu Reisha Didahava. You are the head of gold. So there's this metaphor, this imagery, and the head of gold represents Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar, who's the king, head of gold. So gold is the color or the material that's associated with Bavel. Okay. Kesef, he says, Keneged Malchus Madai. This corresponds to the kingdom of Media. Who is Media? Parasu Madai. You find the beginning of the Megillah Esther. Sometimes they were Median, sometimes they were Persian. There were two empires that came together to destroy the Babylonians. And where do we see silver used for a negative purpose? Nebuchadnezzar wanted to make an idol out of himself. He called himself a head of gold. And then we see Haman, who wants not to assassinate the idea of God in this world, but instead commit genocide against the Jewish people. And how does he obtain the favor of the king in order to hatch his machinations and his schemes against the Jewish people? What does he do? Aseres alofim kikar kesef. He pays for our lives with silver. And Achashverosh takes the silver. So we have this idea of silver. The silver corresponds to Media. Nechoshes, copper, Keneged Malchus Yavan. That corresponds to the Greek Empire. She pchusim mikulam. The Greek Empire was less impressive than the Persian Empire that preceded it, and less impressive than the Babylonian Empire that preceded it. And because that's the case, just like copper is a step down, you have gold, you have silver, copper, that's what the Greek Empire is. Oiris elim adamim. But what about the Redskins? Oh, Redskins? Forget a football team. You know who that is. That's Keneged Malchus Edom. That corresponds to the Romans who destroyed the second base of Mikdash. And the Romans, their progenitor is Esav, and Esav is Vayetze Harishain. The first baby came out, Admoni, red. And red is always associated with Esav. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So God says, you see these four mighty empires rising up against you. Relax, Yiddelach. It's going to be fine. I am going to plant the seeds of redemption in the middle of the bondage, slavery, and persecution. Maksiv Achrov, what's the last thing we talk about? Shemen Lamo'er. Oil for the purpose of illumination. Who is that? Says the Medrash Tanchuma Melech HaMashiach. That's the king who's anointed. That's what Mashiach means, by the way, anointed. As it says, Sham Atzmiach Keren LeDavid, there I will plant a, so to speak, a root for David. Rachti Ner LeMeshichi. I have created a lamp for my anointed one. Now, in another version of the Medrash, it says, Zahav Lechaper. Zahav comes not Keneged, but Lechaper, to atone before the Malchus of Bavel. And that is the second version of the Medrash. It says, Kesef Lechaper, before Malchus Paras Umadai. And he brings on the same pasuk. Nechoshes Lechaper. The copper comes to atone from before Malchus Yavan, which is Pchusa Mikulam. And they, he says, so why would, then comes the Greeks, he says, were the first ones to use copper currency. So it's not only Pchusa Mikulam, there is actually a connection between copper and between the Greeks, because the Yavan, the Greek Empire, was the first one, Hadinoran Shalahem Necheshes, they were the first one to popularize the use of copper for money. Prior to the Greek Empire, all currency was either gold or silver. And we'll talk about that soon, the difference in gold and silver. Gold dinars or silver sloim, we'll talk about that soon, the difference in currency. The Gemara discusses the difference in gold currency and silver currency, but no copper currency. The first one to start with copper was the Greeks. Now the Kli Yakar, he goes to town in this medrash. He says, "What in heaven is going on over here? How did Babylon and Greece and Persia and Rome, we're in the desert. We didn't even get to Israel yet. Like, what are you talking about? How could these things be corresponding to futuristic events? And it corresponds to them? What we're bringing in their honor? Keneged? What does it mean? So the Kli Yakar says something fascinating. He says, Velinira, to me it seems, Shagam Bal Medrash Zeh Soiver Shakel Kipshutai. Our Medrash, of course, knows that there's literal gold and silver and copper. Of course it's literal. This is not about Babylon. This is not for the purposes of Persia or Greece or Rome. No. But he says, it's not Meramzim Klal Dal Machas. It's not like the Mishkan was indicative of exile. They were building an exile house. It's ridiculous, he says. What he means to say is that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu will show Nebuchadnezzar that all these different kingdoms, Dalad Malchus, V'chinimshlu, the four kingdoms are metaphorized or compared to, listen to this, four kingdoms, right? I'm just going to go over the four kingdoms. Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. He says the four kingdoms are, HaKadosh Baruch Hu shows to Nebuchadnezzar four kingdoms, Zahav corresponds to Babylon. Kesef corresponds to Persia. Nechoshes, copper, corresponds to Greece. Ubarzel, iron, corresponding to Rome. Hey, 1 second. If this is about corresponding to Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome, and Barzel corresponds to Rome, for heaven's sake, why don't we bring any iron? There's no iron. Then we need the iron. This is the longest, most painful gullus. They've killed us more than anybody else. What's going on over here? So he explains that this is when it means keneged, it means when these people will rise up against us. So then we will have a mitzvah that we already did to, so to speak, thwart them. They will come against us and they will say that we sinned and we fell away out of favor with Hashem. And to some degree, they might have been right. But Hashem says they have a merit that shields them. What's the merit? The merit that will shield us from Babylon is the gold that we gave to the Mishkan. And what will shield us from Persia, from Media? The silver we gave. Actually, there's a medrash that says when Haman came and brought his shkalim, a heavenly voice laughed and said, "You're bringing shkalim? My children gave shekels long before you thought of bringing shekels." Which is why we give the half shekels on Purim. So that's the idea. He says Lashon keneged. It says keneged. It's indicative that this is mitnaged al oseh hamalchus. This is what counts. This is the counterweight. This is what defends us. This goes against. Rome comes against us. We go back against them. How? Because we did a mitzvah. And how is v'chein oiret? So we have nechoshes, the copper, which corresponds to Yavan, and then he says oires elim adamim. The red dyed skins of the rams, keneged Edom. Listen to these words that Kli Yakar says. Shehimshil, who is metaphorized lebarzel. And why is barzel red? Kimimenu oisim cherev. It's from the barzel that a sword is formed. And what does the sword do? The sword draws blood. And the color of blood is red. I don't understand this. If this whole business was about creating a counterweight, and that's why we had the gold and the silver and the copper, when it came to Rome, all of a sudden we reached for the Rams, the Redskins. What are you reaching for the Rams? This sounds like NFL, no? Rams and Redskins. We should have gone with the iron. He's like, really, the metaphrase is iron. But how did iron end up being red? Because iron is red, because iron's a sword, and the sword draws blood. For heaven's sake. Why shouldn't we give some barzel? They needed the barzel, they needed the iron anyway. They had to make those 12 forms to bake the showbread. So no brainer. We should have brought the iron. Instead, we're bringing rams, red-skin rams, which these red-skin rams we're going to serve as a counterweight for Rome, which is iron. So I go back to my original thesis over here. We got a problem here. Clearly, there is a need to have these different precious metals, clearly, because it corresponds to different times in Jewish history, and we need the merits of each one. But okay, fine, so we don't want to have everything made of gold, but ultimately, that brings us back to our question about the iron. So, what happened with the iron? Okay, so in order to understand this, clearly there must be something about gold and silver and copper that's not found anywhere else. So let me give you a bunch of very interesting sources for the special and unique message of these three kinds of precious metal and why the Mishkan required these three specifically. And then I'm going to introduce you to an amazing talk of the Rebbe in which he shows us a depth and a profundity in the idea of gold, silver, and copper that is fundamental to the Mishkan and its being built itself. Goes mamash down to the very core. But let me first share this with you. The Shmois Rabbah says on the words Zahav, Kesef, and Acheshus, he says Zahav is Avraham. Why is Zahav Avraham? What is gold? What is gold like? The color of gold. It's like fire. It's like fire. Avraham was thrown into a fiery furnace. He said, okay, so Zahav, the gold recalls Avraham. Kesef is Yitzchak. Why is Kesef Yitzchak? Because Yitzchak was like, he says, Nitzraf ke Kesef. He became purified like silver when he was on the Mizbeach. Necheshes is Yaakov because it says, Nachashti vayivarchani Hashem beglalecha. Lavan said, Nachashti, I did my wizardry, but somehow Necheshes was a portal into Yaakov. Okay, so it's like, this is a bit of a reach, but that's what the Medrash says. It identifies Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and we only have 3 patriarchs, so we don't end up with iron. All right. So let me share with you a very interesting concept which is found in a number of Rishonim. I found this in slightly different syntaxes. In the name, the Rosh says this, the Rabbeinu Ephraim, one of the great Balei HaTosfos, and the Mincha Belula. They all say variations of the same teaching. Even though I didn't find the Medrash for this, but I have to imagine it comes from Midrashic source ultimately that we don't have anymore. So the Rosh says it in the most elaborate, luxurious way. He says this is about Teruma. Teruma is about, what does Teruma mean? It means donation. And when we say the word donation today, what does it mean? Tzedakah. Give money. So he says there's 3 kinds of tzedakah. There's three ways in which a person gives tzedakah. And he says they are metaphorized as gold, silver, and copper. He says the first way of giving tzedakah is when everything is fine. You're not desperate. You're not looking for any help. It's great. It's great. You're affluent. You got your health about you. Everything's great. And the tzedakah that's given with no need, under no duress, is considered zahav. That's gold. That's the gold standard of tzedakah. So if somebody all of a sudden is being generous and giving tzedakah, they say, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Why are you doing suddenly all these extra mitzvahs? Nothing. I'm doing what a yid does. That's the gold standard. Very nice. Beautiful. It's, for example, this could be a person wants to curry favor with the ruler, with the magistrate. He doesn't have any legal problems, but he always be on good terms. It's like insurance. Tzedakah is the gold standard. Very nice. What happens with kesef? He says kesef is a person gets tzedakah when things are starting to go bad. He's looking for merits. Maybe he fell into bed. He's not well. Maybe he's weakened. And because of this, it's he's got a need now. You got a need. You're trying to save the day. You're trying to turn things around. So a person becomes more charitable, so to speak, gets more involved in Yiddishkeit. And then people get involved in Yiddishkeit, sadly, sometimes out of desperation. When everything is already, so to speak, the die is cast, everything is wrong, and people turn to Hashem in the last hour. And he says it's also valuable, but it's not nearly as valuable as a person who turned to Hashem in times of good. I once had an interesting meeting with somebody, and he was telling me he was in a lot of trouble. Everything was very bad. He said, "I'm not going to start coming to shul." He said, "I'm not putting on film." I said, "Why? Like, what do you have to lose?" He said, "I want to come to shul when everything's fine, not when everything's bad. I want to come in a good way." That's it. And he didn't come. I said, "Listen, I'm going to humbly disagree with you. Like, come now, and Hashem will help you, and you'll come when it's good also." But he had this thing in his head. I'm going to come when it's good, because I want it, not because I'm desperate, I'm trying to buy God off. Something to be said for it. So the Rosh says something very interesting. He says that no, the Rosh doesn't say this. The Rosh, he introduces these three ideas to us. Rabbeinu Ephraim brings down the same three ideas, but he says it's actually found as an acronym in the words Zahav and Kesef and Necheshes. Listen to this. Rabbeinu Ephraim says, Zahav is an acronym. We have Zayin, Hey, Beis. He says, Zeh Hanotein Bari. This giver, he's healthy. All's good. Gold standard. That's Zahav. Zeh Hanotein Bari. No problems, no issues. That's the gold standard. Best of all. He says, somebody who waits till things aren't so good, that's Kesef. He says, what is Kesef? He says, Kesef is also, once again, an acronym. Chof, Samach, and Pei. He says, this is tzedakah that's giving, and he says, Kisharoa, Sakana, Poteach. When he sees there's trouble on the horizon. That's Kesef. So, Zov, Zehanotein, this guy's bari. So, why are you giving? You have a problem? No, Zov. This guy, I don't know, I'm seeing some stuff on the horizon. I'm a little nervous. He sees trouble. He sees clouds forming, clouds gathering. So he sees sakana peseach. And then he says, the worst way of giving is nechoshet. What is nechoshet an acronym for, he says? Neder chola sheyomar tenu. This is the vow of a sick person who says, give. That's nechoshet. He says, now this is the one who's giving out of desperation. The Mincha Belula has it a drop differently. He says, Zohav is Zahanotin Bari. He says, Kesef is Sakana. Kishahu Sakanas Pachad. A little different. Not Kishahu Roa Sakana, but Sakanas Pachad. And his acronym was that Nechosha says, Netinat Chola Sha'amar Tenu. The giving of a chola who said give. All right. So there's three kinds of giving, and Hashem wants to include all of the giving, because the truth is, as long as a person gives and a person does, that's already good. So it's good. It's good. And that's why there had to be Zohav, Kesef, and Choshas, because there's a message attached to it. If it would only be the gold standard, a person would only think, you know when I'm appreciated, you know when Hashem wants from me? If I'm gold. But if I'm Kesef, thank you very much. We don't need you to build a Mishkan. So no. Person who gives because he sees problems, it's also valued. Hashem appreciates it too. Take the Kesef. And even the person who gives in a desperate state, a mitzvah is a mitzvah, and for whatever reason it's done, it still has value, and that's why you have the idea of nechoshes. So from this perspective, that's why you have Zav, Kesef, nechoshes, because it has a different kind of message that's attached to it. Give me one of those Sfarim over there, please. The Bureau book. Now I'm going to share with you an amazing talk of the Rebbe, where he goes into these three ideas of gold, silver, and copper. And he explains them. He says this, like it had to be in these three ways. And really, once you hear what the Rebbe says, you'll understand why there couldn't be iron, and then I'll show you a reason why iron is just bad to begin with. Sorry, find this.
Wasn't there something that had to do with the Mizbeach, that iron wasn't supposed to be wasted?
Yes, there is an idea that the stones of the Mizbeach can never be touched by iron because iron brings death. Okay, but the menorah had to be made out of iron. And we see there was iron in the Beis HaMikdash. There was iron there.
Yeah, but there was like a concept of negativity.
Correct. There's a negativity that the stone shouldn't be over the stones of the Mizbeach. It shouldn't be carved. The stones of the Mizbeach were natural stone. It's true. This is such a concept. So, but they needed iron. They did need it, and if you had to counterbalance, right? And the stones, by the way, of the Beis HaMikdash were scored with iron, just off-site. You couldn't hear any noise, any clanging. Where is this? So this Sikha, I researched today in the original. I'm finding it over here now. And the Sikha opens actually with the question, why don't we use only gold? And that brings, the questions of how and why gold would be most valuable. And he makes the case, doesn't go through this whole medrash that I brought, but he makes the case that we should have had only gold. So, but we didn't have only gold. And why was this? And the Rebbe suggested that gold, silver, and copper represent three different kinds of Jews. The Rebbe says that Zahav, that gold, represents the Baal Tshuva. The Baal Tshuva, we know, his service to Hashem is actually more valuable than the service of the tzaddik. It says, "B'makom shebalei tshuva oimdim, afilu tzaddikim gemurim einin yochelen lamed." So the most valuable of all is the concept of balei tshuva. Second to that is the notion of kesef. Kesef symbolizes the concept of tzaddikim. Tzaddikim do not come to the level of the balei tshuva. However, the world kind of functions on righteousness. That's the foundation of everything, is that things should be good and righteous. You can't wait for extraordinary stories of Baal Tshuva. You have to begin with, we try to just do what's right. And the Cheshes, the Rebbe suggests, copper, represents the wicked, people who are sinning, actual sinners. And the Rebbe goes in the original Sikha to explain that the Gemara talks about the difference between gold currency and silver currency, and said each one has a virtue over the other. Gold is more valuable, but less negotiable. Silver is less valuable, but always negotiable. And the question is, what's better to have with currency? Is it better to have currency that's worth more, or better to have currency that's accepted everywhere? And because, liquid is better, right? I mean, you need cash. So you can't exactly go shopping with a golden dinner. But you could always go shopping with silver. And in fact, money came to be known not as zahav, but in Hebrew, money is called kesef. Because typically, money was most often used with silver, even though we have all these proverbial stories about buried treasure and boxes of gold coins. And there were gold coins and gold ducats and gold dinners, that's true. But ultimately, it's not the gold, it's the silver that's most negotiable and most often used. So the idea of the tzaddik then represents the concept of the silver. That's our preferred pathway. This is the way we want it to be. The Baal Tshuva is a rarity, and that's why it's more valuable. Just like gold is rarer than silver. It's like a thing in people's head that they love gold. Everybody wants gold. I think somebody told me once that silver is called poor man's gold. Can't afford gold, you get silver. Everybody wants gold, but not everybody gets gold. You can't always get gold. And sure, it's great to be a Baal Tshuva, but you can't plan. You can't schedule a disaster. Schedule some sin, and then you'll do tshuva. It doesn't work like that. If you say, I'm going to sin so I can become a Baal Tshuva, it doesn't work. Hashem doesn't really give you the opportunity to do that. So the concept then is of gold and silver have its competing values. But then there's copper, and copper is considered to be a step down. And the Rebbe says that with regard to the Mishkan, we actually have three opinions as to when the command was given. According to one opinion, the command was given after the Jewish people did tshuva from the golden calf, in which case the Mishkan and the request for Teruma was asked from who did Hashem ask from Balei Tshuva. According to another opinion, all of this was asked from the Jewish people at the time of the giving of the Torah. At the time of the giving of the Torah, the Jewish people were perfect. They were all converts. A convert is like a child who's born, starting out with a perfect slate. So they were at the level of tzaddikim. And then there's another opinion that the mitzvah was given at Matan Torah, but Moshe Rabbeinu didn't actually share the news and information until after Yom Kippur, but nonetheless, the mitzvah remained in place even after the Jewish people sinned. In other words, the mitzvah of Teruma was a mitzvah that Hashem had expectation, not from the tzaddik, not even from the Baal Tshuva, but the mitzvah remained in place even when the people were on the madrega, on the level of Rishoyim, wicked and sinner. And so, the Rebbe goes through the calculation here. The tzaddik might say, why should I get involved in the physical, the material, the mundane? I'm a holy man, I'm a tzaddik, I'm a holy person. I'm going to focus only on holiness. The Rebbe says, what do you mean? But that's not what Hashem wants of you. Hashem wants you to build a dwelling place for Hashem right here on earth. And you know what happens if you don't use your material residuals for holy purposes? You may end up building an egel. Okay, so the tzaddik definitely has to make his contribution. That's the next person.